We're a bit behind schedule, and I'm told that we have a short break afterwards, so there will be more time for questions. And as we begin, I want to take you on a short travel in time. We're traveling to the year 2028, and we're going to learn a little bit about what software development might look like a decade from today. So I want to introduce you to Joe. Joe is a programmer in an average large company. Large, well, not Google or Amazon large, but large and average in the sense that they make, well, average products. We're going to learn about Joe's working environment. And in order to do that, I want to introduce you to one of the main problems that software organizations had 10 years ago, in 2018. One of those problems was waste. A bit of background about waste in software development. Back then, every 2 years, the Standish Group used to publish a report. They called it the Chaos Report. From the report of 2016, we can learn that 30% of software projects never completed. So they never reached their goal. Of the remaining 70%, half of them were overrun by either time or budget or both by an average of 190%. In terms of scope, projects were delivering 40 to 80% of scope. Large companies, like Joe's, used to deliver more towards the 40% of scope. The Standish Group back then estimated that the cost of waste in software development in the US alone, in that year only, in 2016, was in the excess of 160 billion US dollars. So what is waste? I like to refer to a report produced by Sedano and his colleagues in 2017. And the reason I like this report is because it bases their findings on companies that already do some kind of agile software development. So they use short iterations, and they use backlogs, and they have multidisciplinary teams. And Sedano and his colleagues identified 9 types of waste. I'm going to run through 3 of those waste types in a little depth and skim through the rest. The first type of waste is building the wrong products. Take, for example, this organization that makes an infrastructure product for software development in the cloud. In the beginning of the release, product managers talk to the customers, but the programmers, the engineers, they never meet the customers. They know about the requirements from their managers who produce the backlogs. At the end of every release, time after time, product managers are disappointed because they get features which are different to what they envisioned. Engineers are disappointed because they get scolded upon on things that they don't know why people are angry with them. And customers are disappointed time after time because they don't get the things that they were promised. Second type of waste is mismanaging the backlog. Take, for example, this organization of 12 software development teams. At one point, they were working on a big feature, so they divided it in 2. So at any given point in time, 6 to 8 teams were working on this feature. 3 on half feature, or 4 on half feature, and 4 on the other half. At one point, the VP of R&D wanted to see a demo of the feature. And at that point, they discovered that all sorts of integrations are not working between the 2 halves of the feature. And they started to find bugs, and they had to fix things that could have been discovered earlier. On top of all that, there was a different backlog for the CI team, who were trying to fix CI problems. And everyone was angry with them. Although they were working frantically to fix the problems, many times fixing the same problem multiple times for different teams. Third type of waste is rework. Take this product owner who consistently prioritizes new features over improvement items. When they want to release, they find bugs in development that could have been discovered earlier. Not only that, they also find design issues that if they were fixed there and then, it was fresh in the mind, and also they wouldn't have all the archaeology of new features that make the design fixes much harder. Other types of waste include, for example, unnecessarily complex solutions. For example, trying to solve future problems, also known as foundations or infrastructure. Irrelevant cognitive load, like managers who have multiple roles and have to switch between roles all the time, or teams that do manual tests because they don't have enough automations, and that affects their cognitive experience in the organization. Psychological distress, for example, low morale, maybe because of doing a lot of excessive manual testing, combined with a coercive management style. Delays and multitasking. For example, this team that pulls in an item from the backlog, and then when they get to a good point in development, they push it to the CI and wait for a 6 hours build. While they're waiting, they're pulling another item and started to work on it. And of course, the build fails, and now they're working on 2 features. And when they have good enough code, they push it to the CI of 6 hours, and they need to decide whether to pull another feature and start juggling with that, or just wait for the CI to happen, or maybe just fix the bloody CI. Knowledge loss. For example, this engineer that only he or she knows a legacy part of the system, and then leaves the organization, and the knowledge escapes the company. And finally, ineffective communications, like teams that are too large, and the communication is ineffective in the team, or maybe managers that override the team's estimations, typically over-optimistically, and indirectly creating more cognitive load and more psychological distress and more waiting and multitasking, etc. Luckily, today, 2028, we got rid of most of those waste types. Robots help us fix those waste types and identify them early in the process, and even get rid of them entirely. Managers tell us that technology is at our fingertips to help us do a better job. Joe is working on a new feature. Today, after the daily stand-up, it was announced that a new feature must be worked on, an urgent feature with a tight deadline. And Joe is readjusting to the new plan. He's coding away on a new method, and then Siri tells him, "It looks like you're writing a new piece of code. Would you like me to suggest a unit test for the code you are writing?" 38% of programmers who write tests before code get a raise within the next 3 months. Joe is aware of the tight deadlines and chooses to ignore Siri. 2 hours later, again, Siri tells Joe, "While you were coding, I found a failing automation test. Would you like me to show you the failing test and the failing lines of code?" Immediately, Joe opens Slack and writes to his teammates that this automation must be looked at urgently. A Slack bot adds this as a subtask on their Scrum board. Next morning at 10:40, Siri tells Joe, "Would you like me to show you the tasks that you have completed since the last daily stand-up? Because you have a stand-up in 5 minutes." Joe is certain that within the next 5 minutes before the daily, he's going to finish the new method he's working on, and chooses to ignore Siri again. 2 days later, Joe finishes the new feature ahead of time, and he's very pleased with himself. He's surprised to see a message on Slack from the VP of R&D calling him to his office. Joe enters Jack's office, the VP of R&D, and Jack is moving uncomfortably in his chair. Jack opens and says, "Look, Joe, I'm looking at a report from Siri, and in the report I see that you've ignored 88% of Siri's recommendations. Our company policy that any engineer cannot ignore more than a third of Siri's recommendations. Unfortunately, with those standards, we have to inform you that you can no longer work with our company." Joe will try to look for a job as a software developer. What he didn't realize back then, that as soon as Jack hits confirm, robots updated Joe's LinkedIn and Doc.io profile. And he finds it very difficult to find a job. 6 months down the line, Joe will eventually find a job. How ironically, at a plant for recycling electronic waste. Do you find this story grim and eerie? I want to tell you that our stories about the future are way more grim than that. In the year 2029, a year from today, Skynet, a machine learning supercomputer, will attempt to destroy humanity with a new type of robot. In 2019, about a decade ago, 3 rogue humanoids set off on a killing spree only to be stopped at the last minute by an officer of law. And in the year 2045, you still have time for that, don't worry. Most of Earth's population will be addicted to a virtual reality game called the Oasis, and firmly believing in an urban legend that when someone wins the game, he or she will get total control of the Oasis. If you think that it's only stories and movies that are like that on our future, think again. In the year 2018, 10 years ago, Google have passed the Turing test, placing a call with a hairdresser and booking a reservation. From the papers, we have learned that Google's terrifying new artificial intelligence future has prompted concerns about the future of the takeover of the robots and the abuse of artificial intelligence. Also in the same year, Intel, Uber, and Volvo were working on an autonomous car that killed a pedestrian. From the papers, we know that the Arizona tragedy will not slow down autonomous vehicles. And also in the same year, 2018, we've learned that Amazon will try to get rid of cashiers in supermarkets. How do we know that? Amazon Go and the 2.3 million cashiers it could leave behind. What they didn't tell us in 2018 is about all the hundreds or maybe thousands of new kinds of jobs that didn't exist then. And today in 2028, everyone's working in that. But that doesn't sell the papers. So are humans becoming the disposable waste of software development? Absolutely not. We had such stories about the future way before 2018 and the proliferation of robots. I would like to hypothesize that a wasteful software development is in itself a social defense, symbolizing the fear of becoming irrelevant in a state of constant uncertainty combined with irrational pressure for clarity and speed. Let me read that again for you. A software development process that is characterized by a lot of waste is in itself just a symbol. It's a symptom of something deeper. And that deeper thing is our anxiety of becoming irrelevant in a software development environment that by nature is highly uncertain, combined with a great desire for irrational clarity and speed. In order to understand that, I want to take you on another journey in time. But just before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Ilan Kirschenbaum. I'm an Agile coach and a co-founder at a consulting company, Practical Agile, and a co-founder at a software development company, Practical Software. Before that, I was Joe, with all the irrational fears. On the way to grow and become an Agile coach, I've also learned organizational development and consulting. And through these studies, I've learned some new concepts, new to me, even a new language that helps me understand organizations, maybe even organizations like yours. So I want to take you back to the year 1957. And Isabel Menzies publishes a paper, a new paper, to become a seminal paper. A case in the functioning of social systems as a defense against anxiety. Menzies is fascinated by the work of nurses in a hospital. There are student nurses and senior nurses in the hospital, so the students are fresh out of school. They know everything about the nursing and the latest about the nursing profession. And those nurses, the ones we expect to be merciful and caring for the patients and working intentfully to help patients heal and feel better, work in an impersonal manner to patients, sometimes even in an unprofessional manner. And Menzies has a hypothesis. She starts from the hypothesis. Nursing involves high levels of uncertainty. Some patients will not get well. Some will even die. At the same time, in the relationship between nurses and patients, patients expect nurses to do their best, but they themselves don't do what they are required to help them heal. Same with patients' families. And that increases the tension between nurse and patient and family. On top of all that, patients' families are even a little envious of the nurses who are now in close proximity to their relatives and have the opportunity to develop close relationships. And that combination, high levels of uncertainty, combined with patients that resist care and families that put additional pressure, is so unbearable that nurses evolve defense mechanisms, types of waste, if you like, to avoid the anxiety. So you're probably thinking now, what the hell are you talking about? And what's that got to do with software development? So let's see some of Menzies' findings. And I'll try to relate that also to software organizations, and then some of the underlying mechanisms that worked in that hospital and that frequently work in software organizations. One aspect is splits, split between nurse and patient, and split between nurse and her own emotions. For example, nurses relate to patients as a pneumonia in bed number 5, and not by the patient's name. Maybe a little like Teams, where you go to the team room, and on the Scrum board you find bug numbers and Jira issue numbers, rather than customer names, or heaven forbid, names of people that work for the customers or customers. And also splits between nurse and emotion. For example, good nurses don't mind moving from ward to ward in an instant, and they don't feel the pressure. Those that feel the pressure are the bad nurses. So that's one kind of split. Another issue is issues of responsibility, or maybe irresponsibility is more appropriate here. Nurses evolve all sorts of small ceremonies. For example, they go to the patient's bed and they look at the chart and they double check and triple check the chart as if some magical solution will jump out of there. And they see that the patient needs to get medicine exactly every 8 hours. And it's 2 a.m. in the morning and the patient just fell asleep. And they wake the patient because it says 2 hours on the chart. Maybe it's a little bit like software development teams who have only one way to do sprint planning and only one way to do retrospective. And this is how you do Scrum. And they won't hear of other ways. Nurses also skip boring tasks. The things that they don't like, they skip it. And then they blame others for acting irresponsibly. Maybe it's a little bit like programmers who won't test because it's not their role. And testers who won't record the defect properly because the programmers anyway can find it on their own. And managers who don't have time for one-on-one meetings. Paradoxically, programmers blame managers that they don't have the time. And managers blame the programmers that they are acting not responsibly. So everyone is blaming the other on their own projections. In the same way that programmers, developers blame managers that they cannot plan. And managers blame programmers that they cannot be trusted. And very similar things happened at the hospital. On top of that, and coming back to the hospital, the whole situation is fixated. Good nurses are born for the part. And the nurses we have here in this hospital, we're stuck with them. Also the senior nurses, they cannot manage. The ones that are born for the part know how to be great seniors. You know, organizations similar to yours also are probably having similar issues. We've asked 40 people, what do they think software development will look like in 2028? Out of 40 people that answered the questionnaires, more than half believe that robots will replace most of the testers' work. And more than half believe that robots will replace a significant part of programmers' work. At the same time, more than half believe that they will still have a job in software development. And more than half believe that they will become better engineers. Maybe exactly those 40 believe that they will be the ones developing those robots. So why is this happening? And I'm going back to Menzies' hypothesis. Nurses want to avoid anxiety, so they evolve those little ceremonies and all sorts of things. Same with people in software organizations. I have a list of sticky notes here with all sorts of things to remind me. Programmers, engineers, they don't have time for learning because there are tight deadlines and everything. Managers help programmers by enforcing tighter deadlines. So there's even less time for learning. Paradoxically, this dynamic only shortens the sell-by date of both programmers and managers, and indirectly only increases anxiety. I want to try to remodel this on software organizations. Take, for example, this organization with 15 development teams. Those are 15 component teams. At the beginning of every release, a senior manager directs subordinates, his managers, to go and find all the dependencies between all those component teams. The managers go and make a list of all the dependencies. And as soon as development starts, they find that there are new dependencies emerging that they didn't think of before. Managers scold engineers that they didn't raise the flags on time. Engineers are angry with managers that they don't know how to plan. And the senior VP demands that in the next release, they will do better planning. And they will do a better job of finding the dependencies. And will not hear of a structure change, for example, to feature teams, because that will create anxiety in the system. Towards the end of the release, it's clear that most features will not end on time. So they take the most urgent features and they form task forces. They open war rooms and people sit in those war rooms. There are people from multiple teams working together. All of a sudden, there are multidisciplinary teams working together to finish the features. And the features finish beyond the scheduled time, but they do finish because they work together. And there's a sense of energy and everything is moving. And you feel that the organization is alive. And as soon as the release is out, everyone goes to their original teams. Menzies has identified all sorts of mechanisms like that operate in organizations. For example, senior nurses that divide the tasks very, very, very small. So the student nurses cannot see the big picture. An organizational structure emerges that the student nurses cannot see the big picture. And the big picture is now only held by the seniors. The student nurses, they don't want to be seen idling. So when they finish their work, they find other things to do. So they stock up the equipment in the ward and things like that. Then something happens, and they see that all the nurses are busy, and all the tasks are being worked on, and there are new tasks coming in, those tiny tasks. So they move nurses from one ward, from another ward to this ward, creating a vacuum in the other ward. A situation emerges, an organizational structure emerges, that there are constant moves of nurses between teams. between teams and between worlds. And the effect of the frequent moves is undermined. For example, nurses that don't have the time, and they undermine the importance of relationships, nurses with peers, nurses with seniors, and definitely nurses with patients. Here's a quote from Menzies' article on frequent moves. Underestimating the effects of excessive moves indeed manifested in psychological detachment, type of waste, social defense, protect self against threat of transfers, reduced psychological involvement, another social defense. In turn, reduced interest and sense of responsibility and resulted in don't care attitude, social defense, which then resulted in patients and nurses, customers and developers, if you like, complaining bitterly, social defense. Nurses, developers, felt guilty and anxious when they found this in themselves, and angry and hurt and disappointed when found in others. In our context of software development, see how much this resembles Conway's law. Any organization that designs a system, broadly defined, will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. Social defenses intact. And also the other meaning of Conway's law. If you look at the system that the organization produces, you can find in that the communication structure. And with that, hints to the social defenses of the organization. And that's it. This is where Menzies ends the article. It's not the end of the talk. Wait. It's not the end of the talk. This is where Menzies ends her article. If you wanted anxiety, you read the title of the paper, Defense Against Anxiety. So now you have it, anxiety, in bucket loads. That's the criticism on Menzies along the years. Isabel, if you're looking for anxiety, this is what you'll find, anxiety. I want to bring you to the context of Menzies at the time. Isabel Menzies is a co-founder and a partner at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London. The institute that produced one of the first papers ever based on empirical evidence on self-organizing multidisciplinary teams in the 1940s. Menzies had the remedy. Why did she stop there? I think that what Menzies wanted to tell us is that even at the time of the first papers in the 1940s, many organizations resisted taking this concept, self-organizing multidisciplinary teams. We don't believe in that. That will not work. And what Menzies wanted to tell us is, in order to explain why those organizations resist a potential remedy, we want to understand, firstly, what's going in the organization. So we look for the social defenses that can point us to sources of anxiety in the organization. And if we work on reducing the anxiety to good levels, to levels that they can just work, then we can work on multidisciplinary and self-organizing teams. In the years since Menzies' paper, there was a lot of work on what we now call positive psychology. At Menzies' time, there were a few works, and most of them were not very practical. Today, we have loads. And in order to work on those, I want to bring you back to 2018. So when you go out the door, you'll still see Agile on the Beach, and everything will be okay. So I'm going to go through a few resources. Each of them is a wealth of information. From each of those resources, I could prepare not only a talk, but a whole course. You will find those resources. You'll take the ones that you like, delve deeper, and then decide what you want to do next. The first resource is the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. The one thing I want to take from Mindset is the concept of praising effort. If you see someone in the organization that is writing automations, automated tests, where this is not the norm, praise the effort, even if the result is mediocre. Now, of course, if there's a great result, of course, praise great results. It would be silly not to. And spend most of your time praising effort, even on little things. When you praise effort, you signal to the people in the organization that it is safe to fail here. And when you know it's safe to fail, that has the potential to reduce anxiety. If you take one thing from this talk and you're not doing it already, begin praising effort. The second resource is the book Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. It's a book about how to change things when change is hard. It's packed with practical information based on theoretical concepts. Really highly practical book. And the one idea I want to take from this book is search for the bright spots. If you have a team that does great retrospectives where other teams don't, interview that team, find what they do differently. And once you've done that, bring other teams to interview them and learn how they do better retrospectives. If you see someone fixing the CI and not waiting for the CI expert to do that, find out what happened there, interview that person, and then bring other people to interview her, so they also find what she did to fix the CI in such a way. When you search for bright spots, you signal to the organization that we have the potential to find solutions to our own problems. And that has the potential to reduce anxiety. And then, when you find bright spots, and when you see other people searching for bright spots, praise the effort. The third resource is the book Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. Again, it's packed with practical advice. And the one thing I'm taking from that book is design good defaults. For example, when the build fails, automatically lock the master. Of course, you can immediately unlock the master and push more code as much as you like. The default is lock the master. The expected behavior is that firstly, you greenify the build, and then you open the master. Defaults are like the guardrails on the road when you're driving in a dark night. When there are no guardrails, you don't know where you're driving. And that increases anxiety. And those guardrails give you a better sense of safety. And those guardrails have the potential to reduce anxiety. And when you see people design great defaults, praise their effort. The fifth resource is the book Turn the Ship Around. It was mentioned earlier this morning. It's a book about leadership and many practical ways for the leader model that David Marquet promotes. And the one idea that I want to take from this book is encourage intent. And I'll show you by example. I wanted license for IntelliJ instead of Eclipse. Okay, so what do you need from me? Well, I need you to authorize, I guess. And what do I need to know in order to authorize the IntelliJ license? I don't know. I guess if we have budget? Well, okay, so how do we know if we have budget? I don't know. What do you want from me? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do this together. I'll show you how we know whether we have budget or not. And next time, if you like, you can do it on your own. When we encourage people to show the intent, and then to act, when you act on something that brings value, that reduces anxiety. On the other hand, when you're dependent on others, that increases anxiety. And dependency is a sign of anxiety in itself. When we remove dependencies, we increase the potential of people to experience less anxiety. And then, of course, when you see people encouraging intent, praise the effort, yada, yada, yada. And the last resource for today is a mailing list. It's called Software Lead Weekly. It's curated by Oren Ellenbogen. And it's articles for leaders in software organizations. It's packed with wonderful articles Some are like things that we've discussed today, and others technical, non-technical, and you'll find loads of pointers from there. And when you do those things, and when you find such sort of resources, you'll see that they point to others, and you'll find a wealth of information that will help you reduce anxiety within your organizations. And then you will be left with only a few types of waste that you just need to fix them, because most of them will go on their own. Let's go back to Joe. You know, Joe is not real. I made it up, honestly. It's just a story. And just like John Connor from Terminator, and just like Deckard from Blade Runner, when the anxiety levels are low enough, it's just a story. It's just a movie. And when anxiety levels are high, and people talk about this at the coffee machine in your organization, it feels damn real. I want to show you what it looks like when anxiety levels are low enough. I had this casual conversation with a friend. I wished him happy birthday on LinkedIn, and he said what he's doing, and Israel, he moved to Canada, and he wrote me this. He works for a small company called Amazon. And he says something like that. It is a huge company. Each can choose what he likes. I moved to Toronto to manage this team. My specialty is optimization algorithms and troubleshooting. I love business, and I'm thrilled when I manage to apply computer science knowledge on real-life problems and make real impact every day. What I do really impacts. I wish I could get a fraction of the savings I bring to the company. My kids could retire. This is what it looks like, and this is what it feels like when anxiety levels are low enough so you can just do your work. And it's not about the size of the organization, and it's not about the type of business, and it's not about any other irrational or cynical explanation that you have that our reality is different. It's just about the working towards an organization that is more optimistic and a little bit happier. So anxiety levels are just low enough that you can just do your work. And with that, I'll open it for questions.
So, how do you stop people wasting time?
You don't. Just forget about spending time, about people spending time. The thing is like this. If you identify that many people are producing waste in the organization, probably there's some anxiety underlying below that.
So are you suggesting one fixes that anxiety?
Yes. So now you acknowledge that there is anxiety, and you look at those types of waste that exist in the organization, and from that you use that as data to try to identify where the anxiety stems from. For example, one department expresses more types of waste than another. So you go and research that department and try to understand what happens there. And then you look for bright spots in that department and highlight those bright spots. And then you design better defaults so they have less opportunity to experience that anxiety. And once that reduces, some of the types of waste will go away and some will stay. And then you can teach them about lean software development and what is waste. But if you start from teaching them on the types of waste, when anxiety levels are high enough, they will not hear you. They will just give you the explanations. Yeah, this is different, and you don't understand, and you should sit here, and you don't know what it's like here, and yada, yada, yada. When we can reduce that a little bit, then we can get rid of waste. And after that, another department will show higher levels of waste. And then you look there, what happens there, and try to look for bright spots that can alleviate that, and so on. More questions? So maybe one more thing, because we have a few more minutes. I thought of this talk in 2012. This is when I first read Menzies' article. It's as if I read this article, she writes it on nursery, it's as if it's been written on a software development company. I said, wow, I have to make a talk on that. But how can I stand in front of a group of software developers and talk about anxiety? How will I do that? So it took me 6 years to come up with the ideas to do that. Now, what happened is I didn't dare face this talk, and I submitted to Agile on the Beach, and then I was accepted. And I said, oh, now I really have to do this. So this is the result of this work, and I'm really glad that I made myself the opportunity to bring this to this kind of milieu, which is very different from Menzies milieu.
Well played.
Okay, thank you.